people recognize authenticity. You have to believe what you're saying. There has to be authenticity in your product, in your supply chain, in your design, in your marketing. It can't be gimmicky, or at least for my audience or my customer, I know that they want authenticity and some humility. There's different industries within the fashion industry, and you just have to really know your customer and your audience.
You're listening to Customer Growth Sessions, presented by Intergrowth, where we talk through strategies to help up-and-coming e-commerce businesses bring in more customers. I'm your host, Pat Ahern. Let's jump in. All right, listeners, welcome back to the latest episode of Customer Growth Sessions. Today, I'm thrilled to have on Caroline Priebe, the CEO and founder over at Driftless Goods. Caroline, welcome to the show.
Hi, Pat. Thank you.
Thank you for coming on today. We're excited to have you. Can you start out telling us a little about what is Driftless Goods? What do you guys do over there?
Sure. Driftless Goods is an online marketplace, but it's also a brand for people who like nice things and like the outdoors, but prefer not to wrap themselves in plastic and synthetic chemistry. I launched with a plastic-free regenerative wool merino fleece as opposed to the synthetic kind. And we also feature other plastic-free goods like wool slippers and organic cotton socks and fair trade, local t-shirts and arts even, and a variety of things that sort of fall into that lifestyle category.
And one of the things I found so cool when you and I were first chatting was really the origin story of how you got started with the business. But rather than me, spiel about your business, could you tell us a little, how did you end up starting?
Sure. So I have worked in the industry for a long time, specifically in sustainable fashion. And for the past 7 or so years, I've been consulting with startups and larger brands. And for some of the larger brands, I put together these sort of reports and or roadmaps for them as to how they can be more sustainable or circular within what's called the biocycle. So like natural versus synthetic materials. So within those reports, I would put together, highlight business case studies, but in some instances, I would also make them up. So there's some that are existing, but then I would also sort of make some up. And in doing so, I sort of designed Driftless Goods. It was something that I wanted to see in the world. I personally saw this incongruence with the materials and chemistry used to make clothing that you wear in these sort of natural environments. And they're incongruent with sort of our personal health and the health of those environments. And so I saw an opportunity with regenerative wool, merino wool, which is the original superior performance fiber that doesn't require any synthetic chemistry. To put that into a category, I started with fleece, but I would like to expand to weatherproof shells and base layers and other categories. But I started in the fleece category because that also releases, the synthetic versions release the most microplastics fibers, which we're learning is accumulating in our bodies and our oceans and our organs and is not great for any of us. So I had met this regenerative rancher, this really cool pioneering regenerative rancher out in the Pacific Northwest, but she works with a bunch of groups in California and the Pacific Northwest, doing a type of ranching called regenerative ranching that builds soil health, but it's also very conscious about how they treat the animals and also the ranchers themselves so that they get paid and are able to make some money selling this fiber. And then worked with some processors in the United States. They're called Nativa Regen, and they process the fiber and are able to make it traceable. And then I found a knitter in the United States and then a cut and sew facility. And anyways, I was able to develop this regenerative merino wool fleece that's 100% plastic free, put it into a collection, and sort of that's the beginning of the supply chain I sort of designed, but there's a long tail to it. Ideally, I'd like to create soil to soil solutions. So anything I design, and this is very lofty and I won't always be able to do this, but my goal is that anything I design is designed for longevity, but can safely return to earth as nutrients at the end of its usable life.
Tell us a little about the presale, because this was amazing to me that you started out and cut me off if I got the number wrong. I think it was less than $1,000 of total marketing budget that you put into this. Would love to have you share that story. How did you go about conducting this pre-sale. First of all, what did you see in terms of results? Let's start out there.
Sure. Yeah. I was fundraising at the same time as launching, but I still haven't successfully fundraised, but I had this very small budget. And I actually didn't really have any experience in digital marketing in the fashion world, but not specifically marketing. But what I did know for sure is I knew a lot about my customer, right? I knew who they were. I know where they shopped. I knew where they lived. I knew what other brands they bought. I knew what cars they drive. Like I had a very clear view of who that was. And then I had passion for my project, like not to be, a cheese ball, but like what I was doing felt very authentic. And so I think when you sort of pair those two things together, like, your customer and you're not full of shit, you feel good about like what you're putting into the world. I think it makes it easier to market products. You don't need as many like tricks. So I was able to find some help because on the Meta Ads Manager is like confusing and glitchy. And so I had no experience working with that. So I found someone who hadn't worked with small brands, but like knew the back end, would work with me for trade and help me out. And so she helped me set it up. And then I designed the ads with the tagline. So I had great photography, great model, whatnot, that I was used to like doing. And I knew what sort of caliber it needed to be. But then the tagline was for people who prefer not to wrap themselves in plastic. And that felt risky to me because even though I've worked in sustainable design for a long time, I do not believe in green marketing at all. And now more so than ever, because there's been so much greenwashing. I don't want to be associated with anything eco-friendly or anything sustainable. I want to talk about, if anything, maybe the story or the provenance of the things that I designed. But I really felt like I wasn't the only one that wanted not to wrap themselves in plastic. And I also believe that there was this like growing awareness of we are wrapping ourselves in plastic and that's weird. And so I wanted to sort of tap into what I believed was a niche but growing group of consumers. So anyways, I ran the ads slowly. I tested them. We didn't use any of the AI features. Actually, we tested one. They didn't work. I created my own audience. We tested a lookalike audience. I didn't have much data to like put in from, like I only had 300 followers when I first started. I didn't have much of a mailing list. Like I didn't have a lot of existing customers or subscribers to like feed it, and it worked. And so within 8 weeks, I was able to pre-sale about $36,000 worth of fleece, which is pretty amazing because I started out with 300 followers. I still don't have that. I think I have like 1,700 or something like that now. It was a new site. It was a new product, no reviews. I was asking someone to pay full price and then wait a bunch of months to get the pieces, and it works.
Struggling to get new customers? We're here to help. Hey, this is Pat, the host of Customer Growth Sessions. Our agency, Intergrowth, has been helping e-commerce brands like Bella Bridesmaids, Brevity, and JS Dental to get more customers online since 2016. Interested in seeing how we'd help you? Head over to intergrowth.com/CGS to book a complimentary consultation with me. That's intergrowth.com/CGS. All right, back to the show. That to me is amazing, going from, call it a sub $1,000 investment to $36K in pre-sales, as you said, with a brand new product, not even a new product yet, a non-existent product at the time, is incredible. I loved how, when we were talking about this before, not only did you see incredible results with Facebook ads, but you also managed to get featured in a pretty surprisingly impressive amount of publications. I jotted down a couple over here, but if I remember correctly, I think there was Midwest Living, Forbes. I'm probably forgetting one or two, but how did you go about getting featured with really like such an early stage brand? How did you get featured in so many of these main publications?
Yeah, Fast Company, The Strategist, New York Magazine. So how I did it, there's not a formula. So I was a new single mom during COVID in Wisconsin, away from New York, from all my people and my industry. And I was lonely and looking for work. And I started to post things and be active on LinkedIn. I didn't have like a strategy at all. It was out of pure like wanting to learn more, wanting to connect with people, whatnot. And so I had this like sort of formula that was easy for me is that I curated my feed with all these people that I thought were putting out like really interesting articles. So it was like journalists or thought leaders of some sort or entrepreneurs or whatnot. And so I either connected or followed all these people. And then if they wrote something, I would sort of take the piece of it that resonated the most or I thought was like a good point. I would copy it and then I would comment on it. And that was like the majority of my content and it seemed to work. And so in doing so, I met a lot of really interesting people, some of whom were journalists on LinkedIn. And it was like social media is like a weird spot, but LinkedIn during this time was a really lovely place where I actually made friends that I still haven't met in person to this day, but like have had really nice conversations with, both personally and professionally. And then when I launched Driftless Goods and sort of made the announcements on LinkedIn, I didn't have a full press push or anything, but I was able to communicate my story to some of these people that I had developed relationships with on LinkedIn mostly. Actually, some were personal contacts from, I've been in the industry for like a long time. One was like a relative of a friend who was a neighbor and like in Brooklyn. And another one was a woman who's been interviewing me since like the early 2000s, I think, like it's just been someone that follows, that has written about sustainable design. So that's how it happened. And then again, same thing. I think the story just resonated. You know, it was like a little bit different than a lot of the other things happening in the sustainable fashion world. And it was a somewhat interesting, or I'd like to think that's why it's like a somewhat interesting story and supply chain and product and whatnot. And that makes it easier to write about.
When you talk about this, what really sticks out to me is this was not necessarily coming from a place of, hey, I'm going to try and as efficiently as possible comment on X number of articles, and I'm going to have this quota of I need to comment on X number of LinkedIn posts every single day, 4 days a week for 6 months in order to see this ROI. This is something I just care about, and I want to be talking to other people that care about this as well. I take it you do not think very positively of the people that maybe will use AI to leave generic, vague comments in a ton of LinkedIn posts in hopes of building up some engagement.
No, for me, it just gets ignored. I've had some people write some like really thoughtful comments on some of my posts that I don't know and then pitch me SEO services or something. And that's happened like twice, actually, in comparison to the gazillions of in-mail and connection requests I get for digital marketing and SEO services. I did end up having a conversation with them, but yeah, I can't imagine that would be if people know when you're pretend. Like, I don't know. It's not how I work. Yeah, I think most people know when something's pretend. I can't imagine that's efficient of a strategy.
So when you got ready to launch the presale and you're crafting this message or maybe even series of messages for LinkedIn, you mentioned it sounds like the story really resonated with a lot of people, some of them being what ended up being really reputable journalists. How did you go about conveying that story on LinkedIn? Was it a singular LinkedIn post? Was it shared in a lot of different little snippets? Tell us a little more about that.
So pre-launching, I joined trade publication, had memberships to trade publications, which were not cheap, but they were really interesting. And then you could do deep dives into topics. So I used those for the most part. And then that's what I would cut sections out of and then comment on. I'd also make comments on other people's posts if I felt I had something to say. It wasn't random. I'm sure you've experienced it. It's like you read something and it hits you and you have something to say. Other time you read something and you're like, that's interesting or that's not interesting and you have nothing to say. So I only write things if I feel like compulsed to do it and I'm in tune to whatever that feeling is. And, maybe sometimes I shouldn't act on an impulse, but if I have time, I do. And again, it was a very collaborative space. Like, yes, we had some critiques of the points being made, but I felt like at that time, people were making an effort to be like, yes, and versus like, hell no. It was like, yes, and, or perhaps we could explore this, or I have this other idea. And then when I had Driftless, my memory is that I kept it really simple and short, knowing people's attention spans aren't very long. And it was just like who I've partnered with, why I love Shanika wool, or this like wool group that I was using, that this is for people who like nice things and prefer not to wrap themselves in plastic, and about how the benefits of like merino wool, and it's why it's like superior performance fiber, I had some photography, and that's it. But then also, then I got press, and then you post press. And then I think that begets more press potentially because people are like, oh, I want to talk about this too.
Well, hearing that, so much of the pre-sale, it sounds like, came from, a relatively small budget, let's say, that went into Facebook ads that really just took off in terms of performance, because from what we can tell, it sounds like you just nailed the messaging with this need that people really cared about. And then really just being very active on LinkedIn in a really genuine manner. So let's say for listeners maybe that are considering launching a new e-com business, or maybe have launched and are looking to go the pre-sale route, what advice would you offer to them in order to drum up some PR, in order to build those early sales, really to build that following? What are your thoughts there?
I mean, so much of this, I've worked in this industry for a long time, and unfortunately, so much of this is luck and timing and unexplainable. For example, I remember hearing, I was following Buck Mason, this other brand's trajectory. Actually, I highly recommend listening to podcasts about other brands, because I think I learned a lot by that, because I think founders and CEOs are very candid on podcasts, right? They tell you what they did and what worked and what didn't work. And there's a lot to learn. So anyways, I learned a lot from other founders by listening to podcasts. And one time there was this interview with one of the Buck Mason founders, and he was talking about how there was a piece of press or a feature in the Wall Street Journal, I'm assuming style section, but maybe not. There's a piece about them in the Wall Street Journal. And that was really a tipping point for them and their sales and brand awareness and whatnot. And I was like, oh, that is so fascinating, because I had previously worked for this menswear brand, Freeman Sporting Club, designing. And I remember we had multiple features in the Wall Street Journal, and it didn't do nothing. It was maybe we had, but it wasn't anything that I remember all of us being wow, thank God we got that. We're always appreciative, but it definitely wasn't a turning point in the business. And so you just never know what will hit. But I think being, I was saying before, people recognize authenticity. You have to believe what you're saying. There has to be authenticity in your product, in your supply chain, in your design, in your marketing. It can't be gimmicky, or at least for my audience or my customer, I know that they want authenticity and some humility. There's different industries within the fashion industry, and you just have to really know your customer and your audience.
Well, Caroline, this has been amazing. For listeners that either want to connect with you, maybe want to follow you and learn more about sustainable fashion, or just want to connect with the Driftless brand, where should they go to hear your most recent insights and learn more about the company?
Yeah, absolutely. I'm still on Instagram for now, although I have mixed feelings about Meta, and I don't think they're that kind of small business. So my newsletter, sign up for my newsletter. Actually, that's the best place. I will not spam you. It's from me. They're very personal newsletters, and they are short, but to the point, or at least I think they're short. I also just started a Substack, which is an extension of Driftless and my consulting at the same time. So it mixes, I will be talking a lot about sort of small business, growing a small business, the importance of small business, politics, feminism, sustainability, sustainable design, partnering with nature, whatnot. It covers all the things that my brain, have been rolling around in my brain for 24 years. So yeah, newsletter and Substack would be great. I'm also on Pinterest, Driftless Goods, all of it's Driftless Goods. I'm actually still on TikTok, but I haven't produced a lot there lately. But yeah, newsletter, Driftless would be.
I love it. And our brand is still on TikTok as well. We'll see what happens in the US market. So with TikTok, and I don't know, probably 30 days, 45 days from now, from the time of our recording. But what about the Driftless website? Where can people go in order to buy Driftless Goods?
Driftlessgoods.com. Drift with a T, and then less, LESS, and then goods.com. And I have very limited pieces left. I'm trying to sell every last piece. I have a handful of pieces left. And that will be the end of that particular fleece textile. I'm going to be moving on to something else. But yeah, stay tuned.
Very exciting. And listeners, take a look at the show notes. We'll include links to all those different social profiles and Caroline's Driftless Goods website as well. Once again, listeners, this is Caroline Priebe, the CEO and founder over at Driftless Goods. Caroline, thanks for coming on today.
Thank you.
Thanks for tuning in to Customer Growth Sessions. If you found it helpful, subscribe and give us a review. It helps us to grow the show. Looking for more SEO guidance on how to grow your business? Contact us at intergrowth.com/estimator or email me directly. You can reach me at pat@intergrowth.com. That's all for today. We'll see you again soon.